Ja, to. Okay.
Hey, there we go. Now my mic's working. We got here. Oof. How's it going, man?
Going good. How about you?
Going well. We
Awesome.
turned the tide, huh?
Maybe. Uh, but let's wait a couple minutes before we start and see if any other policy teams coming up too.
Sounds good.
Hey, Marcus.
Hey guys, how's it going? I don't see tapioca. Oh, there you are. Awesome. We shall have a recording.
Cool. Okay. I think we'll start in a bit, but today I actually wanted to kind of go away from a little bit of policy, but more talk about, I guess, what KlimaDAO is trying to actually do and the goals it's trying to achieve. And I think that might, help educate the community on what the different tools or different things we use in the KlimaDAO system and make a better, informed decision on certain things and, just have a better understanding of protocol. I think over time, as we grow, the ideas that or things we're trying to do can kind of filter as word of mouth spreads. So I just want to get a little refresher on what KlimaDAO and how it works. What do you think?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
That's kind of where my mind's been heading too, right? Because we're trying to enter this like a resilience mode without framing that. But once we hit that, and the music slows down a tiny bit, we're in this less of a craze. It's definitely going to be about the fundamentals, and building up this awesome refi ecosystem that we are trying to get off the ground.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so let me think. Okay, for you guys at a high level, we're trying to create this decentralized asset-backed currency, backed by assets that will, help assist communities. The community's goal of driving climate change, right? And I think that's something that has been not been talked about. A currency is a very high goal of a token. So we're trying to create this decentralized reserve asset. It's a lofty goal, and it's really is much larger than we imagined. But I guess for Osmo, for you, our question like, what did you think the goal of Clean Without was? At like a high level.
Yeah, it was pretty targeted at first, right? I was coming to the carbon markets and I was learning about BCT, and it was like, okay, so we're gonna corner BCT, and the first person that explained Klima to me was equating it to the GameStop short squeeze, and they were like, we're gonna squeeze BCT, we're gonna corner the carbon market, and we're gonna pump up the price, so Corp's got to pay their fair share. Uh, and the degen in me, got curious, of course. But taking a step back from there, and learning more about it, I mean, going after an on-chain currency, like that is such a lofty goal. So that definitely wasn't how I first thought about it. But then seeing it tie back to Olympus and trying to create this economy, this alternate economy, was just an incredibly like sufficient use case in my mind, because I saw all of these different protocol on liquidity use cases popping up around December or late November. And they're all interesting, but like, what is the use case? And I was asking myself every time, like, is this use case sufficiently large to warrant this system being viable with rebasing and basically like perpetual printer. So how do we make that viable at scale? And man, like that's what drew me into Klima so hard, and here we are, because it is just such a macro vision.
Yeah, it's great to hear. Yeah, so one of the main things we talk about in Klima, is this fact of kind of this carbon black hole for assets, right? And to an extent that's true, but the end, I guess I see it as more of as like collateral damage and a side effect of what we're trying to create. When we're creating a currency backed by these assets, we acquire them and try not to, release them unless to provide more insurance to the community. But yeah, I just wanted to highlight that before we kind of get started. But the problem we see today, in car markets in general, I think we all established that the on-chain market is significantly better than the off-chain. With the ability to transparently see the prices everybody takes. The ability to buy a carbon asset and get exposure to the carbon world. With very minimal friction. Assuming kind of how DeFi works. We have this very, very once in a lifetime opportunity where we're creating another economy, from scratch, right? Olympus, when they first created their product, they started on DeFi while DeFi was flourishing, right? So they already had like a market established, and we don't have that. We don't have that access today, right? When we're starting out, but since we are the first movers, we get to build the market how we want, And if we're gonna build a carbon market from scratch, from zero, uh, we should pair it or use the currency that's most beneficial for the carbon markets or most beneficial for the world, right? Like if we recreate the carbon markets, using USDC or a stable coin, as a back or as a the underlying currency, that's great, but there's still some issues with that currency as well. So if we can if we can design a currency that is, backed by these assets, dependent on these assets, grows with the assets, it's beneficial to the carbon markets itself, then I think a really good system, For example, MakerDAO. MakerDAO has very wide influences in the DeFi market, and you don't ever see protocols, I guess, partner with MakerDAO in order to like use DAI, for example. But the reason why they use DAI is because it's the most prominent stablecoin in DeFi. What if we had that situation, but KlimaDAO can help protocols, to start up their own currency or carbon markets to start up their own market or carbon financing that we can provide because we are a decentralized reserve currency, Stuff like that, I think is really impactful and what we really need to focus on to make this work. What are you guys?
Yeah, and just to like broaden that vision a little bit, and C3 talked about this a little bit in the AMA, but really we see a lot of the primitives from DeFi as applicable to the refi space, but they don't exist right now, right? Like there isn't, for instance, a carbon-carbon swap doesn't exist right now. It's all done through generalized dexes, right? Whereas something like a curve-style carbon-carbon swap would give us a lot more capital efficiency in terms of the liquidity in the carbon markets. So that's really something that like ultimately Klima is a shepherd for this new market. And we want to make sure that all of the appropriate market facilities and protocols that are required to support a robust on-chain economy end up getting implemented for carbon assets. The really interesting thing too that is a little bit unique to refi and different from DeFi is like, there's the existing legacy carbon market where projects need to find funding through traditional financial systems. But because of the unique nature of the on-chain markets where capital can be allocated much more freely and in a way that is more dynamic than in the legacy traditional finance world, we can, as Klima, we can support the development of new methodologies and new verification systems for carbon offsets that can potentially open up the carbon offset market to much smaller scale operations than were previously feasible in the legacy market. So like if you're producing less than like 1 million tons right now as a project, it's not worth it to go through the Vera process to get your offsets issued. And so that cuts you out of the verified carbon market. But let's say that we can partner with a protocol that's implementing like an Internet of Things monitoring approach, for instance, to generate Vera offsets. We can facilitate that. We can provide funding. We can provide support. And if Vera and the legacy offset verification providers aren't willing or able to come with us on that journey, we can also support the development of new standards because we are such a large block of demand within the refi carbon market. So I see Klima, I guess, as like in many ways, like a decentralized bank, where a decentralized central bank, where the central bank is essentially the steward for the economy, right? Like the Fed guides monetary policy, sets interest rates, and facilitates the functioning of the rest of the dollar economy. Ultimately, that's Klima's role for the on-chain carbon market, right? To facilitate liquidity, to serve as buyer of last resort. Yeah, I hope that vision makes sense. I'm happy to talk more about some of those pieces as we get into Q&A.
No, yes, that's a great explanation, of what Klima can do. Not only what the carbon market can do for Klima, but what Klima can do for the carbon markets. It's a lot, So I wanted to kind of omit staking for now, right? I guess on understanding how the protocol works, at a high level, the what is we're rating a currency. I guess next is like how we're going to do it. So staking is a complementary to bonding, sorry, but bonding is kind of like the crux of the protocol. People kind of focus. There's a lot of focus and limelight onto staking, I feel, and rightfully so. It's very easy to kind of justify high APY as a method to gain value, but bonding is kind of where the value is generated for the KlimaDAO treasury and community. So I kind of want to focus on that first. At a high level, bonding is issuing liabilities against assets in your assets in their treasury. So when as a user, you're able to exchange your assets that you have, in exchange for Klima. So when you give an amount of BCT or any carbon asset to the treasury, and then it will issue you a bond, which is this instrument where you get your Klima over a 5-day period, right? And the benefit for you is that you get a spread on the bond price and the market price. Bonding is very very hands off from us. We can kind of guide it. We can guide the bond capacities and whatnot, but one of the greatest things about bonds is that it's very hands off. For example, the price isn't determined by us; it's determined by the demand of the market. If there's more demand, that means the bond prices will tend to be higher, and when there's lower demand, the bond prices will be lower to incentivize, and that removes a lot of moral hazards for us because we kind of let the market determine everything. It determines how much, how much how many bonds do we sell, at what price we sell them, how long we sell them, like all those criteria. It's kind of deferred to the market, and I think that's really good because whenever we introduce human variables or human interactions to something to the market, it makes it significantly more inefficient, right? The market's kind of the best determiner for those parameters. But doing so require, these assets in the treasury, and it backs our token, and generates more value for the protocol in theory. Do you guys want to talk about bonding your view? Hello?
No, that was a pretty good coverage of it. I'm thinking from a policy standpoint, right? Letting the market determine how these rates are played out is going to be an optimal end game. But in the interim, we do need to have like a policy to target which assets we want to acquire in the treasury. And so that's a really intriguing problem for us as a central bank of carbon, and probably one of the main determinants is like, well, what assets do we want to acquire? And so bonding is really the mechanism that we get to play that out with.
Yeah, and the question has already come up. I was sure it would around the NCT proposal. All I can really say definitively on that front is that we are putting together an RFC that we'll be putting on Toucan's governance forum to propose an allocation of the rescued value from the rebalancing action. I think from my perspective, and I think also from many in the community's perspective, really the acceptance of NCT bonds is tied to a satisfactory agreement with Toucan on how that rescued value will be distributed. Because I think a lot of we've done our best to smooth over the relationship with Toucan to try to ensure and remind everyone that they're our partner, we're still working with them. But I think there's still some reservations, at least that's the sense I get from what's been posted on Toucan's governance forum about that, and also on the NCT RFC that they put on our governance forum. So, I've heard a few voices say that, it benefits Klima to take in the NCT, even if we don't get the value back. But I think from our perspective, there's a concern that basically we don't want the community to feel like Klima has been like it would be walked over or in any way taken advantage of. We don't want to set that precedent. So I think that's where we sit right now. Basically, we're going to see how this governance process plays out on Toucan's governance forum. And if there's positive response and they're amenable to the RFC that we put on their forum for allocating that value, I think we'll feel a lot more comfortable moving forward with a KIP for NCT bonds. Is that a fair summary, Brian?
Yeah, no, I agree.
Selectus, I hope that addressed your question. I'm happy to follow up if you'd like.
Awesome.
Oh, I see. Yeah, there was a follow-up question. So yeah, the rescued value. So my understanding is that yes, it's being used to provide liquidity for the NCT pool. I believe it is an NCT USDC pool. I have to double check that. So yeah, and so there is a concern that isn't the value being eroded by the sell pressure? Like if people are selling NCT into that pool, isn't the value being eroded? And yes, in US dollar terms, that's true. But ultimately, we're not super concerned about the exact dollar value. We're more concerned about the proportional value. Because short term, we're aligned with Toucan, they want to launch NCT. We want NCT to be launched. We didn't want to try to stop them from using it for liquidity to somehow preserve the dollar value. So what I think would ultimately happen, this is what we're proposing, is that the LP tokens are what would be distributed, and they'd be distributed proportional to like the original value bridged. That's what the proposal we're putting together will detail. And yeah, so like we would get some amount of NCT USDC as liquidity, and then we could decide what to do with that once it's allocated to us. I mean, putting all my cards on the table, like I don't think it necessarily makes sense to leave it in NCT USDC. We would probably reallocate it out of that pool, but that would have to be decided with community input. Brian, was there anything else you wanted to talk about before we start taking questions?
Yeah, I just want to cover bonding a little bit more, then staking, and then what staking does, and then wrap it up there, just like a little high-level concept, and then questions. Yeah, so but bonding, forgot to mention that we acquire assets, but we also acquire liquidity, right? And liquidity is honestly very underrated. I feel like because it facilitates the market. The whole point of liquidity mining is because providing liquidity as a public good or as a to facilitate it, it's costs a lot and it's not often profitable. So that's why we have in the DeFi days we have liquidity mining, where people where protocol rewards users for providing liquidity and governance tokens or whatever their rewards are. The downside of that is that you're very dependent on the market, right? You're very dependent on the market to provide rewards. I mean, sorry, by liquidity, and these liquidity that you do get as a protocol, is very nascent. It's only for that moment of time. The moment that you take out rewards, the liquidity is gone, and liquidity is bandwidth. Because the more liquidity you have, the more you can facilitate trades, and without the lower the liquidity, the lower trades you can do. It's very, how do I say? It's a very vicious cycle you have when you have this liquidity mining for yourself. What KlimaDAO does is we kind of own the liquidity rails to Klima. That way, users are very confident in using this as a currency. You have this network, a very thick network of the currency, and you can exchange for any carbon asset. It becomes very prominent to be used as a currency. But to ensure that happens, you have to facilitate the market. For us, facilitating. Wait, sorry. In order priority for a currency, security of the reserves, and then I guess facilitation of the currency itself, and then returns on it, right? Returns is very small on the priority of the currency. But yeah, but by us holding the liquidity, now this cost action, from other protocols in their native governance token, for us it becomes a revenue generator as well. A negative turn to a positive. So that's what bonding liquidity that does for us is very important. We do that. Now on the staking, bonding is very good because we acquire assets, but we dilute ourselves because we have to give out liability in form of Klima. By having the users stake and expand their supply as well, that dilution effect from bonding gets massively muted. For example, let's say if we just had the bonding mechanism but no staking mechanism, what would happen is that one, the supply will grow, but only by bonding. So all the emissions are from bonding, which means you're 100% diluted every time you do a bond. When you have the staking in the mix, users who are active in the protocol and want Klima to work or use it as a native currency, since you have the staking rewards, it offsets that dilution significantly. Not entirely, of course, right? But the more you have rewards going to the stakers, the less dilutionary, right? But that's only if your bonding can match the staking, right? For us, we've been starting to reduce capacity because KlimaDAO has kind of absorbed a significant part of the market, and the growth has limited significantly. So we have to match the bonding to kind of match the growth we can do remain, right? And we have to match staking in order to keep that the same as well. So that's the big justification for the reward rate reduction, or future reward rate changes in the first place, right? like say maybe refi grows significantly faster than we expected, in a year or so, then we can facilitate higher growth. But that's the main purpose of staking, right? To expand supply to a large degree, to facilitate a currency. A currency can't have millions, it needs hundreds of millions or billions in order to work and to, dilute bonding activities. I honestly think, staking is kind of not the coolest part of the protocol, like staking is more like a must because of bonding. But it's just a tool that we use, to help KlimaDAO grow. And that's all it is, right? It's not the end of the journey. I mean, it's not the goal. Like staking is not the goal, or it's just a means to the goal, I guess. I think it's I think staking has kind of been, a little bit overrated in my opinion. And there's so much other cooler things about KlimaDAO that I don't think it is, popularized because of staking. But yeah, I don't think staking is that interesting, but it is needed. What what's your thoughts on that, Marcus? Ultima?
Yeah, I was just laughing on mute when you when you said staking is overrated because it's kind of like the easy road, and whenever my first interactions with Klima was through staking, right? Because it just makes sense, it's logical, it's an easy and passive way for you to accrue your share of the market rewards. So you can't go wrong with staking. But then there's this whole flip side of it that is really, really interesting. And the main way that we accrue value from a protocol perspective is the bonds. And also you have those extra rewards getting paid out for those that actively can grab them. So I was like pretty surprised to see like an aversion to staking, even at like equal rates to this, or an aversion to bonding, excuse me, at equal rates to the staking rate. Yeah, and personally, bonding is misunderstood. Yeah, and I think that the V2 bonds are going to be a big improvement for the quality of life for both the protocol and the users when we can just buy a bond and the whole entire bond vests and we get Klima at the end, and instead of it coming out in increments and then having to claim your Klima, and it's a whole taxing affair, and it's a headache, and it's like, oh, do I need to wake up at 1 a.m. to grab this bond? And that turns a lot of people off too. So kind of improving these toolings that we have, in the form of bonds to make them more accessible and more understandable is going to be a big part of what I think is on our plate for policy in the month ahead. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no. Bonds V2 architecture is much more composable, and there's a lot more things you can do to it. But yeah, I didn't mean to say staking is overrated, as in like you shouldn't stake at all. Please stake your Klima. I just mean, I guess it is not the it's not the end goal of the protocol. It's just the means to the goal. Marcus, you have anything to say before we start doing questions?
No, that all sounds good. I think let's open the floor.
Yeah. Rex wants to speak up, so I'll let him in.
Yo.
Hey, Rez.
Hey.
Hey, Rez.
So I'd like to say hi to the Karen convention. I hope all managers are on standby. So I have a few questions. So we talked about dilution a bit ago. Well, bond-based dilution, and I've noticed, like, checking out all of the stats, that actually I think Cujo has written a Dune thingy that actually tracks bond-based dilution, but it's not included in the dashboard. Is that because the like, it's incorrect, or is that because like some other reason?
You're talking about the one on the there's like a Klima policy, or Klima minting and emissions.
Possibly. Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, since I haven't seen that, I just saw that it's like Klima dilution metrics is a query. It's a top favorited query on Guja Wolf's Doom profile, but I
Yep.
don't see it in the Klima main, which I'm wondering, is this like a communication thing, or what's up with that?
No, I don't think it's necessarily deliberate. It's just not the most straightforward metric to understand. But I think we could move it over. Right now, it's on that dashboard I just put in office hours chat. Unfortunately, Dune is timing out on the dilution query,
Yeah,
of course.
I noticed.
Yeah, and that is like a whole other discussion, which like
Yeah.
as I'm leading data and metrics with Cujo inside of the KlimaDAO, and we really are not super happy about Dune. So we're long term, the goal is to move all of our metrics to a subgraph running on the graph network, and then to build our own front ends basically that will query that data and visualize it, because ultimately Dune is just not they do not have sufficient resources to do the kind of computation we want to do.
Yeah, no, completely reasonable. Though Dune is like a really awesome tool, like big picture. I don't know, personally, I'm like a huge fan, mainly because I hate self-hosted solutions.
Yeah, well, and it's that delicate balance, right? Of like
It is.
they're providing a free service, but like if the free service is not
Yeah,
usable because it times out,
it needs to scale up to your level, exactly. So
exactly.
like,
And
you
my
know, just
understanding,
take my money, you know, do it.
exactly. Well, that's the thing, is like my understanding is that paying for it doesn't even help.
Yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, exactly. Like, you
Yeah, because
know, it's like I'm sure KlimaDAO would like to just pay them for its work, but you know, if it doesn't, that's kind of sad.
yeah. So yeah, so basically that's the plan. And in terms of moving the dilution dashboard, it looks like Kuja just posted. I think we can easily embed it onto the main Klima dashboard as well, and add an explainer for it.
Yeah, I completely understand. Like, it's just a bunch of numbers, and I'm really, you know, as a, well, currently not as a data scientist actively, but as a person who has done quite a lot of it, I'm really, you know, interested in exactly what numbers mean. So the second question I had about the dashboard is that I've, you know, seen quite a lot of people quote the treasury market value to market cap ratio as kind of like a justification on why something might be over and underpriced. Though, like the risk-free value to market cap ratio is nowhere to be found, and that's like a really good, like, you know, way to think about valuations. Am I wrong about that? Like, I'm really curious. I'm still trying to wrap my head around like these two conflicting narratives almost about numbers. I don't know if that
Yeah,
question made any sense.
it kind of does. I mean, I think so like my interpretation here is that some protocols count, you know, their entire treasury market value as or they tried to purport that their treasury market value was like a relevant number to defend in terms of like buying back or something like that.
Yes.
I would look at the treasury to market cap ratio more like the way you'd look at a PE ratio. I think they're both relevant. I'd say that like as a measure of like market valuation relative to the expected market value, then I think treasury to market cap is a relevant metric. It's just not necessarily people interpret it to mean that like somehow one Klima is guaranteed to be worth whatever percent of the treasury it's worth, but
Yeah.
the treasury market value can change, of course, and
Exactly.
we don't defend
Bonds.
it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I don't
Bonds
know.
and just the assets themselves, the price is changing, whatever. There's like a huge amount of things that can happen that's gonna change that ratio. So
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, completely agreed. Yeah.
In terms of your question about whether we could add a chart that is the like total carbon custodied in compared to market cap, we could, but it's basically always going to be less than 100%, because of the fact that we own, well, or I should say, I don't know how meaningful of a metric it is, but it's worth thinking about.
Everything you've said is completely fair and understandable. But yeah, just what numbers mean is a really exciting discussion.
Definitely. Yeah, I want to talk about that one more. Because what it really is saying is like, it's basically a question of like, how much does the market believe that Klima is actually a custody service? Meaning like the faith that like the staking rewards will be paid out, and like at the end everyone will get their carbon offsets. I don't know. It could be worth looking at, but let's talk more about it, maybe in policy forum.
Yeah, sounds cool. And kind of a last question I have, since I know, well, at least Korean is OG Omi. Marcus, I think you too, maybe? Right? No?
Yes? Not OG, but yeah, I'm an Omi for sure.
Yeah. If I remember correctly, like they might not have this in their docs anymore, but there seemed to be like this old implication that if Olympus builds up like deep enough liquidity, that the price will eventually, become stable. Do you think that, like looking back on it now, this seems like a realistic expectation?
Well, the stable in terms of what, right?
Yeah,
because
exactly. Well, stable as in like it's gonna start floating at some point and kind of start at least shedding some volatility. I'd assume that's what it might mean.
Yeah, our end goal is for us is still to make a floating back currency as well. Yeah. Yeah. So liquidity does that as well. Just similar to the fact is like if the market is so big that enough, even the largest volume or trade doesn't do anything, it's stable, So that's like what.
Yeah.
I still don't like feel that's true, especially like just coming back to like this, the fact of like 9.9. If there's an expectation for something to be stable and you can collect staking rewards, there's like that just gets people more leveraged. But sorry, I need to be right back for a moment.
Yeah, totally. I think
9.9
there's
is
two
very
different.
prominent. Okay,
Sorry, go ahead.
You can go. Oh, you.
What I was going to say is I think there's actually two different mechanisms that we're talking about here that are driving the volatility. So on one hand, you have the depth of liquidity, right, which is very analogous to a traditional market, right, where basically the more liquidity there is, the larger amount of capital is required to move the market by a given percent. Just that's the way market makers operate, right? They'll widen the spread if there's less liquidity and narrow it if there's more, and that causes the market to move more gradually just because of the narrower spread. So the similar thing applies on DEXs, but it's defined by slippage, right? So the more liquidity there is, the lower slippage will be for a given size order. And that has the same effect, right? Basically, it narrows the spread and requires more capital to move the market by a given amount. The other factor, though, is what you're getting at, which is more like the tokenomics of the underlying asset. And on that front, yeah, definitely, like the higher APY is, the more volatility you can expect because there's just more reward for staking. So you would expect people to want to buy in, and you'd also expect people to want to sell their rebases to take advantage of that. But as the APY reduces over time, we do expect that to go down. And the other thing is that 9.9 the thing about 9.9 is that there's a certain there seems to be some like a burnout factor where like after a certain level of volatility, people get liquidated, and then that volatility dies down because there are fewer positions. So there is definitely a dynamic there. I don't think it's static, but what I would expect is that as liquidity deepens and APY goes down, that the impact of 9.9 will be lessened because the volatility overall will be going down. But I'm curious to hear what Brian says about that.
Yeah, exactly. Marcus is right. As APY goes down, well, I guess the way I see it is as certainty goes up, right? There's a lot of volatility because there's a lot of uncertainty with Klima today. Even with that 8,000 now going to 1,000 APY, right? As you lower the APY, your expectations are very gets aligned with that APY as well. So when people 9.9 the high APYs because you can compound it and get even more gain, but people won't 9.9 as much, when it's at sub 10% APY, 10 years down, 20 years down.
Definitely.
But 9.9, I think it's a very valid issue. And DeFi today, you have, because we have protocol on liquidity, and that we promise that it won't, it won't rug from you. You guys, we won't remove liquidity under like huge, really bad conditions that match your Klima. But the thing about on the other flip side, it means that lenders or people who deposit stable coins to facilitate this leveraging, they have no risk. This is like a very unique situation. The depositors, they have risk, but the lenders themselves, the people who just lend stable coins, they have no risk because of protocol on liquidity. So that's one of the reasons why I think 9.9 has become very it was very overbearing, I guess. Maybe, or not overbearing because we survived, right? Like even with that much debt we had in the system, we had around like almost 25 million for leverage on our side, right? Or no, even yeah. And that's a lot, for our very market today, just for refi, that was a lot. And the fact that we paid out all the back debt, it shows our protocol works. But we have to develop a system needs to be developed where risk is reintroduced back to the lenders, right? Because that's the reason why they'll keep doing this, right? Which I try not to recommend, but it's gonna happen, right? Because they have less risk.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to, well, not what we're trying to do, but I know another protocol is trying to solve this to reduce risk, right? And I think Olympus is talking with them as well. So hopefully this won't be as big of a problem anymore, right? But it's a valid concern about 9.9, I think.
Yeah, I think decentralized reserve currencies all have this common 9.9 situation. But on the other hand, I'd at least hope that average DGen has learned from this experience as well, and is maybe a bit more cautious, hopefully.
Definitely, 100%, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, just main thing that I wanted to raise was as liquidity deepens, I think there's gonna be this perception of volatility goes down, so now it's safe to 9.9 again.
Yeah.
And I think that's gonna introduce volatility back into the system just from the virtue of the expectation of less volatility.
Yeah. We can ask the market guys, the people who control the market protocol. We can ask them to introduce like a debt ceiling, right? But more.
But then there's just gonna be the next person that's still going to give out loans. I don't see how it can be like realistically stopped.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sorry for hogging up all of this time. You guys gave me like a lot of things to think about, and thanks for the answers. Cheers, guys. This meeting is super informative.
Awesome. Before we go to the next question, I want to I'll put you to the audience. There was a comment in the office hours with the community being put under too much pressure. So, with the metrics we have right now, they're very much slowly, going to their current state, right? And there's two ways to kind of improve metrics. One of them is to do a reward reduction, And the second one is to, increase your bond capacity such that, the metrics gets better, right? And, initially when we were in this downturn, we wanted to ensure runway and security for the token. So we increased capacity there. Where we didn't, I guess, realize that is that the demand for refi is not as high as it was before. So we have to factor as well. But yeah, but by reducing the reward rate now to like more manageable levels, this will be less of an issue. So yeah, just want to bring that out there. Does anyone else have any questions?
So there's this question that I'm trying to address about the comparison with CBL Geo futures. I think what I'm trying to get at really is that, like, the legacy market is what it is. Like, legacy players are going to try to create products that fit, the market that they're used to. But like, nobody in legacy, in the legacy world is talking about like permissionless, decentralized, open services. They're all going through the legacy rails, right? They're all relying on legacy, national government-based regulatory frameworks. The scale and efficiency that they can achieve through a traditional approach is really going to be dwarfed by what the on-chain market can support. I haven't looked into the clear chain system. What it sounds like is probably an enterprise blockchain, which is effectively just a database, because it's not decentralized. But I have to look into that more to say for sure. I'm happy to talk about this more, but I would consider it very similar to comparing like Klima and the on-chain carbon market with a legacy like carbon ETF, right? It's still a legacy product. It's got all of the access and scale issues that any other legacy financial product has, and the real advantage of refi being on chain is that we can take advantage of all the innovations that blockchain deliver. Public blockchains, I should say, right? Because private blockchains, while they're immutable, they're centrally controlled. So it doesn't really have all the advantages that public blockchains like Ethereum and Polygon have. I hope that addressed your question, Frank. I'm happy to. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'll take a look at that video. As far as I know, we didn't take any direct inspiration from their product to answer your question.
So we don't got any questions. I'm gonna actually today, me and Oxy were talking about policy, and he asked me this language I used. It was I think since launch, Klima has been correlated to BCT, but as a currency, we want the carbon credits to be correlated with Klima, right? And I think I wanted to bring up, I guess, the perspective, or the idea of being perspective. Currency, we always say, we're buying an asset with dollars or euros, because they're currency, right? But it's the same thing as selling your US dollars to get another asset, right? We need to start thinking of a shift to currency, right? Because right now, we are seeing that how do I say, clear price is affected by BCT. And what we really want is, BCT price to be affected by Klima, right? One of the ways you can do that, for example, is kind of create this independence. And I guess that occurs when you make when you have an independent price action relative to the carbon currents, right? Carbon assets, sorry. And Oxy would bring up the point is like, well, if we're backed by the carbon assets, how do we ever kind of create this independent, I guess, evaluation from the carbon assets? And while you can be, backed by these carbon assets, and you can be, you can derive value off of them. You can have different price action because sorry, you can have different, how do I say, evaluation things to work by creating liquidity rails for the other fiats, right? So before, when we didn't have the Klima to USDC pool, all our demand was effectively, I wouldn't say diluted, but shifted some of the demand onto the BC token, right? In reality, we want all demand of Klima to go into Klima, right? Because it's very one-sided. For example, we want BCT to go with Klima, but we don't want Klima to go up when BCT goes up. Or no, I guess sorry, I'm wording this very wrongly. When Klima acquires demand, we want all of it to go. We want demand from USD to Klima to go to Klima, and then portion of that goes to BCT. So you do that by establishing liquidity rails against other fiats. So, for now, we're probably going to do just USDC, and then we'll do Ohm or GOM, and then eventually, we'll add other assets there too. And once we get into the stability phase, when we focus the shift from like treasury growth and expansion to really honing in on a price that, while we won't determine it, we won't determine the price that Klima ends up at, we'll kind of guide it towards that price, if that makes sense. Naturally, as you scale up and as you become a market and as you absorb everything, your price is going to stabilize just because you're a massive asset in the space. But what stabilization should do is kind of just lower the ranges that the currency can oscillate between. And I think once we can do that, or once that occurs, you really start seeing the car markets flourish. Any plans that real? Yeah. USDC is the most prominent, or I guess the US dollar is a prominent currency used, it's the world currency. But when there's demand of other currencies, I don't see why not we wouldn't add them, review some. Oh, NFTs. Yeah, we can bond NFTs into the protocol as well, but the easiest solution is to tokenize the NFTs into tokens and then bond them into the treasury. So like, for example, with Moss, what we're talking about is like, what if you can tokenize the NFT and then bond them into the treasury, And we're talking about that, and we're discussing how we can acquire carbon assets with it. So a little bit alpha there from Luis.
We are in continued negotiations with Flow. To answer your question, Bloodhound, I don't have any more news than that. I just know that we're meeting with them again. I think we met with them again the other day. In terms of whether, I guess you kind of addressed this, Ryan, this question from Joaquin about the existence of an independent MCO2 USDC pool undermining our goal, and or NCT USDC. I don't think it's so much undermining. It's more like they're fighting a losing battle, right? Like, we're going to continue accumulating more Klima USDC liquidity and MCO2 Klima liquidity and BCT Klima liquidity, or NCT Klima liquidity eventually, right? Once we get those bonds in place. So at some point, those pools become irrelevant, right? Like, at some amount of liquidity for both Klima USDC and Klima Carbon, for each carbon, the direct carbon USDC or carbon fiat pool becomes less efficient at some amount of liquidity. So as long as Klima continues to grow and we continue to accumulate carbon Klima liquidity pairs, eventually, our mission will be accomplished.
Yeah, I agree. It's just more efficient to pair with Klima than or I guess that's the goal. You know, initially because Klima is so volatile and because it's so new, you know, we pay we pay emissions in Klima in order to incentivize people to bond liquidity, right? Or I guess have liquidity in the first place. Eventually we kind of want Klima to not incentivize liquidity, for these rails to develop themselves because it's just more efficient to do it that way. Eventually we want to shift the idea of you're pairing with Klima because it's a carbon asset and because they'll incentivize bonding. We want to eventually it will shift towards you're gonna pair with Klima naturally, even without any incentives because it's the greatest currency to pair with, in refi wise when it has all the connections to all the other carbon assets, you know, uh, and if you play nice with them, I don't know, play nice. If you align yourself with the community or with the protocol, you'll gain bonding and permanent bond and current liquidity there forever. That won't ever, rug you or take a value away from you. And has the lowest slippage to a fiat off ramp, right? For every dollar we put into Klima USDC, that is $1 in fiat, on ramp liquidity for all carbon pairs. At one carbon pair, it doesn't feel efficient, but when you have 50 or 100 of them, that's not still I call that, but when you have a magnitude of other carbon assets, it becomes really hard to justify why you should do a carbon USD pair. Say like if Toucan had to do this for another two carbon pairs, they would have to spend a couple million each. Whereas you pair with Klima, eventually you will acquire more treasury, acquire more liquidity as it grows slowly but surely. So to Marcus' point, it's not a hindrance. I say it's more like what's the point? Why bet against the house? Is the caption there.
If anybody else has any questions, feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, I think we're coming up on the end here at an hour.
Let's see. Policy team thought on ITER coming onto the ecosystem. I've been discussing with C3 and they've been pretty cool. They've been very nice discussions. I really like their token mechanism because it provides another sink or for demand, right? Currently, we have this kind of pressure on us to facilitate the market, and a lot of pressure is on us and onto the Klima token and onto the team itself, right? What you need is this blended ecosystem of multiple incentives to kind of benefit the refi space, right? Klima's, I guess, incentive is form for liquidity. C3's, I don't know if they released their tokenomics page yet, but when they do, you can see it's very aligned with onboarding, bringing in carbon assets into the chain, right? And that takes demand away, not demand, I guess, pressure away from us to incentivize that part. You can have each sector flourish. It's similar to how, let's say, for a stablecoin Frax, expands, benefits the lending market. The lending market also gets benefited to the stablecoin market by adding the more demand. It's a very symbiotic relationship. Right now, we don't have much allies. Toucan's ally, Flow, Moss, maybe C3, but as it expands, we can all take our portion, what we need to do, and flourish the refi market. Onto governance, there are multiple ways to do this, and I can't disclose them yet, but we're gonna make it so eventually the governance power isn't from the leaders; it'll be for the token holders. We're on the hour, so if there isn't any question, oh, Raz has one question. We're gonna finish this question and call it.
Oh, hello, it's me again.
Welcome back.
Yeah, so I thought maybe a good note to wrap this out on might be, you touched on this for a moment as well, essentially the toucan governance process on returning this arbitraged value, or who deserves what and why, around this. And I've noticed this fact that inside the community there seems to be like a different understanding of who this value should be returned to, compared to uh, what the Klima core, or essentially what the Klima core's position is, that who deserves what and why. So could you detail on why you feel the people that bridged the value deserve bridged the credits deserve the value versus BCT holders at the moment of this arbitrage deserving value? Long pause.
Sorry. I think that decision is more towards the partnership team in a team that has been interacting with Tugan.
Yeah. Mhm. But
I've been
it's
a
like
part of
an
that.
ideological position, so I'm like really curious about this.
Yeah, all
Be-
I can really say, I am helping out the partnerships teams do some of the on-chain data analysis for this proposal. The only thing I can really say definitively is that we want the current approach is to allocate the value proportionately based on the amount of NCT eligible tons that were bridged. And the current like first pass we're doing is to basically, if you have ever sold BCT, then from the address that bridged, then you wouldn't be eligible. This has a really simplistic approach. It has some issues, but it's sort of a first pass to identify the bridgers who are most committed to refi. So that's sort of the heuristic we're using right now. So basically we pull the list of all of the bridgers, the bridge addresses that brought those eligible tons, and then we figured out which ones had done a trade on SushiSwap for BCT. There's some other like edge cases we need to look into. Like it's possible that the BCT were transferred to another address and then sold. So we have to check for stuff like that.
Or put into LP and then like bonded into the treasury. There are like different options. Like this is what I think like makes the whole situation really complicated to really answer in detail. I 100% agree.
Yeah, and this ties back to a question that I think iBuyCoins brought up, which is as a holder of BCT, shouldn't you be eligible for some of the value because it was really the BCT holders who, at the time that the rebalancing activity took place, they were the ones with value at risk, right? But the complexity of analyzing even like a handful of bridger addresses is already going to be challenging. And I think if we tried to do that for all BCT holders, it would get very complicated very quickly. That being, because like for instance, some BCT is going to be held in the KlimaDAO vault, right?
Yep, exactly. As loan collateral. Who owns that? No idea.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
So it just seems like a real can of worms. I think the other thing is like, how do we want Toucan to govern this value, right? I don't think that we want everyone who owned BCT to have to be, to be involved in that governance process directly, just because there's an element where like this value is supposed to be for the refi ecosystem. If it turned out that like just anyone who happened to be holding BCT at the time of the rebalancing activity got governance rights, you basically be handing over control back to the market, which is exactly what Toucan said they were trying to avoid, having this value be captured by market actors who just want to make a buck.
Exactly.
So, that's why we've settled on the approach of using the bridger addresses as sort of the source of truth. And it's a relatively small group, so we can feasibly do the analysis. But I'm totally open to continue discussing this. But I think we're at time for this.
Yeah. I just wanted to also hear it from you guys, since I feel part of the members in the community were like very differently aligned with their stance on what exactly returning value means and to who. And it's not like they're wrong. I think this is a really deeply ideological question of like who deserves value, right? But I just maybe wanted to also surface this that the situation, as you said, is actually really complicated. Like you can't resolve this in 5 minutes.
Yeah, and to address a little bit of what Illumia is saying, or at least try to, I agree with you. I don't subscribe to Toucan's like I guess philosophical position that what they that like it was that it was right for them to extract this value, but it's done right, and I don't want to continue litigating the choice. My goal now is just to make sure that that the Klima community's concerns are voiced, and that we do what we need to do to to get some of that value back for the Klima community. I personally, like in my role on Klima policy, like we have to do what's best for the protocol, right? And
obviously,
as much as that sucks for the BCT holders, that's where like I don't, let's just say that if Klima had been consulted on this operation, I think we probably would have advocated for letting the market arbitrage.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Or at least doing something more controlled, where like instead of just like doing it and then asking questions later, I think the thing that personally frustrates me is that we knew this was coming. Like this was long, and it was never really discussed until the issue became critical.
Yeah.
So I think we would have liked to do things differently, but it is what it is, and now we just need to do what's right for the protocol.
Yeah. Well, if I can state my personal opinion, I think I still land on the side of Toucan was right to prevent NCT from getting yeeted into oblivion the moment it comes out, and I think that's fine. I'm just maybe looking even more backwards, kind of disappointed in the selective redemption not being public knowledge more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, it was in their docs. It just wasn't.
Well. It was in their docs in a very abstract way. I checked the docs when this was happening, and like I was honestly a bit surprised when that information like came out. But then I realized that actually quite a few like technical people who had read the contract like were very aware of this, and
oh yeah,
to my knowledge, Klima was also aware of this, and this wasn't like
we were planning
exactly private. Yeah.
Yeah, we were planning to use it for our retirement tool, so we were well aware of it, but we didn't sort of, I guess we didn't put all the pieces together, or maybe there was like, I think there was some information siloing maybe within Klima that we can improve, but it is what it is. I'm ready to move on, but we got to figure out how to allocate this value.
Yeah, as I've called this before, kind of a shit sandwich. Like, I wish this situation didn't exist, but I don't even know how far back in history we'd have to go for this to not exist. Because it feels like almost inevitable from the series of events of having a pool where you can do one-to-one redemptions to going to a situation where, hey, fuck, this pool like is 100% going to be rated if there's profit incentive.
Yeah, and to bring it back to policy, there is a question as to like, should there have been a fee? Because this is Toucan's solution, is to have a fee on redemption, which is, it's fine. I personally think they set the fee a little high, but it is what it is. But I think there's a question in my mind that's like, why wasn't that in place the whole time? Or like, what is do they
same question
have, a vision for how that will work?
I think I was the person that ended up proposing the fee, though I can't take like, yeah.
Yeah, man, I understand. But hey, let's keep talking about the data stuff, because I would love to collaborate with you and get you to check my work on the analysis of the bridging wallets. I'm going to publicize that analysis so that it's available publicly, and everyone can see what we're doing.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. Well, I think we're going to call it. Thanks everybody for your time.
Yeah, and thank you for the detailed answer. I kind of feel like the community like needed to hear you guys also talk about this more.
For sure. Any parting words, Brian?
No, this is great.
Awesome. Thanks everybody. Peace.
Peace.